Welcome back to our panel discussion, Designing and Planning for Trusted AI Systems, sponsored by Noblus here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Jesse Rollins, the Strategic AI Officer at the Defense Logistics Agency. Rajiv Uppal is the Chief Information Officer for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Taka Ariga, Chief Data Scientist and Director of the Innovation Lab at the Government Accountability Office, and Chris Barnett, the Chief Technology Officer for Noblus. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about the crucial idea of setting requirements, and Taka gave us a pretty good foundation for that. I want to go to some of the agencies that have to set requirements, and we'll start again with you, Rajiv. Requirements, that's really where it all starts for any kind of software system, but especially for AI. So tell us the process there.
I think one of the things that we have practiced, not just for AI, but in fact for all of the software projects that we embark on, is start by as I was saying earlier, start by engaging the various stakeholders, whether it's the business stakeholders, but beyond that, talking to the end users, doing some user research, understanding where the pain points are, understanding what the process is. Sometimes it's important that we don't need to solve the entire problem, but just looking at, if you look at the process, there may be certain places where there are pain points that we can focus on to get really good ROI out of what we're doing. The other thing that we've been putting some focus on, and that is experimentation. It isn't that we say, okay, you start, here's the goal, you need to get to that goal, but rather start with some experimentation. Try a few experiments, give the AI R&D team the autonomy to do experimentation, of course, working with the stakeholders and the business stakeholders, so they can try various paths. And that really, thinking more like a scientist, as opposed to in a typical project, you say, well, this is what we need to get done, and you start from the beginning and you hope to get a certain set of outcomes. When you're doing AI, I think it's really important for us to see that, well, we may have to test out various hypotheses and then decide the path we want to go down. So that's sort of the mechanism or the way we've been trying to follow when it comes to AI projects. That's sort of the playbook we've been trying to put in place for various AI projects that we are attempting across CMS. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we're trying to do.
And when you say that you want to give that experimentation team some freedom to do experiments, it sounds like then you're implying that the business owners need to be open to the idea that their requirements could end up somewhat different than what they might have set out thinking they should be.
Absolutely. And to give you an example, let's say, we were, as part of policy making, CMS puts out rules, and rules, the public will give comments around those rules. And there can be many, many comments, sometimes in the millions. People provide comments. And a goal could be that, hey, we would like to have an AI system that can help us process all the comments. But as you look at the entire process, you can say, well, maybe to begin with, let's try and see, can we just take the comments and classify them into various buckets? So that's a good first step. So again, an experimentation. Let's try see if we can do classification of all the comments we're getting, because that by itself is a huge burden reduction for our teams. So, just one of the things probably I can add here is, before we try to get to complete automation of intelligence, I think we are saying, well, let's try augmented intelligence. Let's augment our humans in a way such that they can perform their duties easier with the help of AI, as opposed to just going down the route of complete replacing of humans with the AI. That may be a goal in some cases, but in most of the cases, what we are really focusing on is augmentation.
And I sympathize with your situation. Sometimes of the million comments, 750,000 might be auto-generated and say the exact same thing. And I've read
Exactly.
some of those CMS rules, and they can run to 500 pages. So I see where the augmentation could be very helpful for CMS. And
Exactly.
Jesse, let's go to you about the requirements idea.
Yeah, so people solve problems, AI doesn't solve problems. And so when it comes to requirements, that can't be a top-down process, because who are the people who are closest to these problems? It's probably not your IT department. It's probably not your data scientist. It's probably not even your executive leadership. It's the managers and operational divisions, so, your product leaders, the people doing the business day in and day out. And so how do you get them to think about AI, right? That's the first step, is getting them educated that, these solutions are even on their radar or a possibility for their business. And the second is getting them the expertise that they need. So, that's about embedding data scientists. So those are the two big groups when I think of requirements is, who are the people in the trenches with the problems doing the work at the real operational level? And how do we get them the right expertise, the data scientists, embed them with those groups to bounce ideas back and forth? I think that's a lot of where the real requirements come from, is from just, the people doing it every day. So if we can get them educated and we can get them the right resources, I think, in an organization, your use cases will explode and you'll see a lot of momentum going forward versus, the pie in the sky ideas coming out of IT or, some of the other executive branches. You really got to get down in the weeds if you really want to get the true requirements for AI.
Chris, it sounds like really then the issue is not so much the software, but the meatware, the people side of all of this. So again, let's ask you for looking across government, looking across, including DoD and civilian sides, that idea of the best practices for making sure your requirements are good.
Well, again, it comes down to iterative design, right? Certainly it comes to listening well. It comes to meeting with a variety of stakeholders and incorporating them, their viewpoints, but also, of course, the end users. I think one of the things that we emphasize, not just in AI systems, but really any software system that is put together, is their user experience. Right? People are now used to interacting with applications on the web, on their phones, on their tablets, et cetera, with a very high degree of usability, functionality. I mean, you just think how, I don't know how easy it is to do your taxes, but there's software out there that make it fairly simple, okay? Much more so than it was just 20, 30 years ago. So you have to take that kind of mindset and integrate often user experience engineers, human-centered design into your practices, into anything you build, and to really make sure that it's acceptable to the user and it can be transitioned to operations fairly readily.
Okay, and that gets to the point of you have to at some point choose technology and choose software. And Rajiv, what are some of the best practices you found for how you start to do your technology evaluation while you're developing requirements? Because in some ways they're kind of two sides of the same question.
Yeah. So, in general, even before technology, I think what we've tried, one of the things that we've tried to do is, can we keep things as simple as possible? And what I mean by that is, as opposed to going towards more complexity in terms of more complex models, can we focus on more simple models so that we can interpret the results that we're getting? That's been more of the focus to it, and to what Jesse was saying earlier. A major part of, for us, one of the major focus points is in educating our workforce. So making sure they understand what AI is, what AI can bring, and how AI can be used across CMS. These are some of the key things. And then, of course, as part of the discovery process that as we've been moving forward over the past couple of quarters and going further into another couple of quarters, we are doing pilots, about two pilots every quarter, with the idea of working with various vendor partners to help us solve different pilot problems. And that helps us in two ways. One is, of course, we're educating our federal staff on what AI is and what AI can do with these pilots. Helps us also work with some of the great vendor partners that we have. Also exposes us to all the various technologies and seeing the technologies in action. So that's sort of been a way for us to, both educate our folks, work with our vendor partners, see how well they are doing, and also at the same time looking at technologies. So that's sort of been our playbook.
And Jesse?
Yeah, just to echo that, to me, again, people solve the problems, not the technology. All the platforms are great. The technology offerings today are amazing. But they're all useless if I don't have the expertise or the people to utilize those tools. And you see this with some organizations, where they're assessing new technology, bringing it in rapidly. Unfortunately, some of those organizations are turning into, parking lots for Ferraris. And so my main concern is we're the drivers, right? Who's going to utilize that technology? You can give me the fanciest car, the fanciest platform, but if I don't have anyone to drive it, I'm not going to get anywhere. So to me, it's kind of that two-part problem. Before we even start, evaluating technology or talking about bringing on more complex platforms, it's, do I have the people who can utilize it? If you don't have the people who can even utilize it, how do you even evaluate the platform? So to me, when it comes to technology, just like it comes to governance or requirements, it's all people-centric when it comes to this stuff.
And I'll ask Taka and Chris while we have a couple of minutes left, though, but isn't it also possible that the technology selection, or at least technology awareness, fairly early in the process can also help drive the requirements because you know what's possible?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Rajiv and Jesse both mentioned experimentation. I'd like to take that a step further. Rajiv mentioned a use case of analyzing public comments. GAO actually has done that use case as well. I think there's some cross-pollination that could be done to say, what was GAO's approach versus CMS approach? What worked, what didn't work? Did we rely on open source? Did we rely on commercial products? I think there's a level of that knowledge sharing that I think very helpful in sort of codifying those requirements. But I also want to highlight couple of sort of enablement areas. So when we talk about AI, oftentimes there's a procurement element of that conversation. From a communication perspective, when you talk about AI, certain parts of the workforce may think like, oh, you're about to fire me because you're going to replace me with these automatons. So how do we deal with that communications plan and labor union, bargaining union conversation, I think is important aspects as well. When it comes to technology, GAO is a big proponent of transparency, and we're seeing a lot of product vendors are sort of essentially covering under intellectual property a black box approach, which makes it very difficult to unpack the appropriateness of the specific, mathematical or statistical techniques. So that, there's a decision to be made around whether an open source approach makes sense versus a proprietary approach makes sense. And then there's the uniqueness of a government. So I'll use an example. The Innovation Lab actually developed a number of topic models specifically with GAO's a way of handling language in mind. What we found was some of the commercial solutions out there were trained on commercial data, while the performance from that perspective was great. As applied to government information and government narrative, it was less compelling. So we were able to sort of develop our own solution that not only met the performance needs, but specific learning criteria that are unique to GAO.
Chris, final word on that idea of technology selection early on?
Things are moving so fast. I mean, just have a very ambitious tech scouting program in place. I mean, to tracking the latest research, be open to change and be open to adoption and do both commercial tools, but the science as well when you're doing any kind of AI employment.
Okay, some great thoughts. I want to thank today's guest. Jesse Rowlands is Strategic AI Officer at the Defense Logistics Agency. Rajiv Uppal is the Chief Information Officer at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Taka Ariga, the Chief Data Scientist and Director of the Innovation Lab at the Government Accountability Office, and Chris Barnett, the Chief Technology Officer at Noblus. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Noblus.